Florida State has got another couple of gripes with the ACC. I think I know what they're doing.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the coaching carousel, the portal, all that and more. We've always got you covered, so like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review. Please and thank you if you have not already. Nick Saban's on Capitol Hill. Yeah, I most definitely have thoughts there. And the Mountain West football schedule came out, kind of flew under the radar. Not on this show, because we always emphasize here at Locked On College Football, a Group of 5 team will be in the playoff next year. Just a matter of who, not an if, not a question that's up for debate. That's something that's going to happen. But Florida State leaving the ACC is also something that appears like it's going to happen. So a couple more details have been unveiled by the Seminoles, and there are 2 complaints that they are investigating, levying. You can phrase it however you'd like. I'm sure lawyers are doing as much in a non-courtroom sort of setting at this point in time, because I don't think they've gotten to that point. But the legal jargon is beyond my scope of knowledge here, but I will relay the information as best I can. Florida State is now looking at the ACC and saying, you wanting to have court in North Carolina is not okay. You're not allowed to do that. I don't know if it makes the biggest difference in the world, but that's not the only thing that Florida State is looking at and saying, this isn't quite right. They're requesting that information be released as it pertains to ESPN's knowledge or discussions that were had about keeping the Seminoles out of the college football playoff a season ago. I don't think Florida State actually thinks that either of those things are going to materially help them in the legal sense. I think these are just kind of thorns in the side of the ACC. I think these are just little jabs meant to move the discussion along. Because what is Florida State trying to do? Get out of the ACC. I think they're going to. The question is how much? How much are they going to have to pay? Is it going to be $50 million? Is it going to be $500 million? Is it going to be $200 million? And then the next question, of course, will be who goes with them. I think Miami would be a very logical choice. Clemson could be a target. North Carolina, less likely. But it would be one of those mentioned schools, Clemson or Miami. One of them would go with Florida State unless somehow, some way, the Big Ten or the SEC, probably the Big Ten, could convince Notre Dame, you should join a conference now. And look, if I were Notre Dame fans, I would want to join a conference. But if I were the University of Notre Dame, I would not want to join a conference. Because the Irish get all sorts of special exemptions and whatnot because, well, they're Notre Dame. And if they are not able to get a first-round bye in the playoffs, something they have signed on and agreed to for at least the next 2 years, do you know that Notre Dame would then have to play another game at home? And how much money does that bring into the athletic department? Several $1 million. So I understand where they're coming from there. But I think that, maybe I'm just seeing it through this lens because I was the little brother growing up. I've got one older brother, no other siblings. And, little jabs can go a long way. Some would say, perhaps my older brother, that I mastered the little jab to just nudge things along or just to be enough of a nuisance. Not to where you're going to snap and overreact, but to where at some point you're going to go, okay, I just want this to stop. These things are just piling up, and this thing is not the primary cause of me doing this, but it's the straw that broke the camel's back. I think that's what Florida State is doing here. That's how it looks to me. Neither one, the court being held in North Carolina, there may be a legal angle that I am unaware of since I, don't have a law degree. Doing mock trial in high school does not count. I'm not going to pretend that it does. Maybe there is a significance to the court being held in the state of North Carolina that I am unaware of. That's possible. I'm sure lawyers in the YouTube comments will be all over that. But between that and, well, what did you know about keeping Florida State out of the playoff? That's not what was actually being debated here. The legal argument at hand has nothing to do with either of those things. So I think they're trying to force the ACC to get to a place mentally where they go, all right, let's just settle. Let's just get this over. Let's be done. Let's just be away with Florida State and figure out how we can best allow our conference to survive. And do I think it can? Yeah. I talked about that earlier this week. The ACC and the Big 12 don't have to collapse. In fact, I think it's more likely that they don't, at least in the short run, than they do. Because the only way that the SEC and the Big 10 can actually, assert themselves as the power two in college sports, college football specifically, is if they have the other conferences to compare themselves to. If you play an exhibition style of match, and this is the problem that, of course, Live Golf has, they're not getting official world golf ranking points. Some would argue they should. They've got a lot of talent over on Live. Now, the difference here is the majority of the national title contending teams are in the Big Ten and the SEC. The majority of the best golfers in the world are still on the PGA Tour, but there's a good chunk over on Live. And you look at the leaderboards and say, boy, that's a lot of the best players in the world, major winners, major capable players right here, right now, going at it in this event. Why aren't you getting points for that sort of thing? The answer is that there are traditional structures that will not view it the same way. And so if the Big Ten and the SEC decide we're going to do our own thing, well, now you're not really a national champion. You're the Big Ten SEC champion, or maybe you would call it the Big SEC or something like that. That's what you'd be the champion of. But how can you actually declare yourself a national champion if you're not competing against national competition? And no, having 4 teams on the West Coast and a couple out east, that does not qualify as a national championship there. So for Florida State, working towards a settlement seems like the most likely option. And the good news, if you're Clemson or Miami, is you could just sit back and watch Florida State do all the dirty work. Right? Like parents, have one kid and they learn things with the first kid, and then they don't make all the same mistakes with the second kid. Whether that's what school to get enrolled in, or how to handle these scenarios, or what do you do when this happens, or anything like that. Not that, I would ever use the expression trial run, because of course parents, I'm not going to broadly apply that spectrum to parents in the world, but that's certainly what Clemson and Miami are able to do. Well, we don't look so bad right now. We could get the benefit, and we could not have to deal with all of the hard stuff. There's a great line in one of my favorite movies of all time, Ocean's 13. Willie Bank is talking to his contractor after George Clooney says, hey, we're going to offer you a Billy Martin, which is, an opportunity to make their friend Ruben whole again as a part of their arrangement. He cheated him out and everything like that. And then George Clooney walks away. That's Daniel Ocean, of course. And then Willie Bank, he says to his contractor, I don't want the labor pains. I just want the baby. That's what Florida State and Clemson are going to be able to get out of this. If Florida State's able to leave and they say, yeah, you just have to leave for this amount, well, then Florida State and Miami will just kind of kick back. And how much? All right. Cut the check. Here we go. We're off and running. That's where they're sitting right now. Not a bad place to be if you are in Clemson or if you are in Coral Gables. It could absolutely be worse. They're not having a fight in court. Their name's not getting dragged through the mud. They're not fighting with the ACC. They're just waiting for the dollar amount. What is it, $150 million? All right, somebody cut a check. We'll pay that over X amount of years and make it happen. That's where things sit right now. I think these latest moves from Florida State are to try to work towards a settlement. It could come in the next couple of weeks. It might not come for a couple of years. Good news in the 12-team playoff if you're the Seminoles. The urgency on this does not have to be top of mind. You can work this out on whatever timeline allows you to get the best deal possible. And as long as the deal materializes, it'll be good for you. Nick Saban talking on Capitol Hill can be good for college football. eBay Motors can be good for you. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Nick Saban on Capitol Hill talking to Congress about college football. I tell you what, when he retired from the sport, my first thought was, oh my goodness, who's going to be their head coach? Well, we've since figured that out, and Kalen DeBoer, I think, is doing just fine, as I thought he would. And I think he will. Maybe not all in year one, but that's a conversation for another day, of course. So Saban goes to Capitol Hill, and when he announced his retirement and then eventually announced his move to College Game Day, I came on this very show and said, this is excellent. This guy's got stories, he's got information, he's got insight. I'm a fan of Nick Saban talking about college football because I think he understands the sport, he knows the sport, he's seen the sport undergo a lot of change, and he recently talked about how, well, it became too much in the sense that, 70 to 80% of the players, in his own words, that he was talking to after the season, he wasn't, in his words, the way that he tells the story. You can think for yourself whether or not you think this is actually how it played out, but he was planning to come back, and then almost all the guys he was talking to were saying, well, how much are you going to pay me, and am I going to play, or else I'm going to transfer? And he said, you know what, I'm out. I'm out. I don't want to deal with players who are only concerned about themselves and not the team and everything like that. And I understand that. I tend to side with coaches in that side of the debate. A lot of people love to side with the players. Well, you're just afraid of players having power. You're just worried about all this sort of stuff. No, I'm just looking at the dynamic between a player and a coach, and I don't know how you're supposed to coach guys who are saying, I demand this of you, and there's no two-way agreement. You have to honor my scholarship no matter what. You need to give me things like that. That just doesn't work. That doesn't work. It wouldn't work for me as a coach. And it doesn't work for a lot of coaches, obviously. For some, it does. And that's great. But the ones who say, I'm not a fan of this, I'm bowing out, I completely empathize. So a guy who's willing to be that honest and then go to Capitol Hill and say, hey, here's what we're kind of looking at here. Here's the situation. Here's what I know. Here's what I have seen. I am, again, in favor of this. There is no czar or governor or commissioner of college football, but let's just say that college football created a Roger Goodell-esque role for the sport, which would be fantastic. Who would you nominate, and how close to the top of your list would Nick Saban be? He's there talking about NIL and the portal and the changes and everything like that and what the structure needs to be. And I think the biggest thing that could come out of these sorts of meetings amongst potential power players at B is leveling the scales to make it a true two-way arrangement, which is what I was just talking about, which is what Saban was talking about. That dynamic that takes place of the player coming in and just making demands. No, conversations can be had about individual situations. That's common in the workplace, which is how it appears we're going to start viewing and treating these players. And so, if that's the case, a lot of you out there, I hope most of you, depending on how old you are, if you're in college, of course, it doesn't need to be the case unless you want a little cash on the side. I assume a good number of you are employed, and you have a job, and you have a boss. Do you have a good relationship with that boss? I have a boss here at Locked On. I have a boss with Southern Utah. I've had bosses elsewhere. I've had good relationships with all of them. I am able to go to them and make requests or have conversations about how I think X, Y, and Z can be better, what we can do to improve, what I can do, what you can do. In exactly zero of those conversations did I feel like I was going in and making demands to my boss, give me this or I'm going to leave. Josh Pate tweeted out yesterday that he was referring to something that Clay Travis had said of, a major player is going to hold out before a game because of NIL money. And Josh Pate tweeted out that that has already happened. Is that good? Does that feel like the dynamics in those sorts of situations? I'm not saying they're widespread. I'm not saying they're on every single roster. But it all starts with one. And the culture of widespread player empowerment to the point where coaches don't always know or can't deal with these players in a reasonable manner is taken off. And I think that Saban is not trying to put the players down. I don't think that's what his intentions are. I don't think he's against player compensation. Just because he says something doesn't mean that I necessarily would think he, believes that. It could be coach speak or all this sort of stuff. But I think when Saban says I'm not against NIL or player compensation, but this structure needs to be different. Because in every other professional setting, including sports, it is different. In the NFL, you sign a contract because there's got to be a give and take. This has to be an arrangement, or else it's just one side taking advantage of the other. And if you're in the camp of, players were taken advantage of and all this sort of stuff, in some ways, you can make that argument pretty clearly. But in my view, and the view of many others, and I think Saban as well, the solution is to not flip the situation around and say, yeah, now you, all the players, get to make, you get to run all over the coaches and you get to have control and do whatever you want and everything like that. No, I don't think that is a good work environment. Again, if that's how we're treating this, if that's the way this is going to look, nice little voice crack here, some indigestion come up, but you know what, we're okay. If that's the way you're going to look at this situation of college athletics and where it's going to go, okay, fine. I accept. I don't love that particular interpretation, but you know what? Okay. I can understand when something is just going to change. All of you, just think about the workplace environment you have with your boss. Would you ever want to go to him or her and say, okay, I need this and that. Or what can you do for me? Not what can I do for you? Not what can we do together? How can we do what is in the best interest of the company, of the team, of the project, of whatever you are doing? That's what's got to shift. And I think that Nick Saban having a voice and giving him a proverbial or a literal megaphone for him to speak out on these matters candidly and openly, I think is really good for the sport. So I see Nick Saban on Capitol Hill talking about NIL and what needs to take place, and I don't know if anything's going to come of it because the NCAA legally, that's kind of weak right now. They've been taking it on the chin in the last several weeks. But I empathize and side with the coaches in this debate. Does not mean that I'm staunchly anti-player. I think that Caleb Williams should be able to be in a Dr. Pepper commercial and get paid money to do that. That makes perfect sense to me. What does not make perfect sense and what is not good for both the players, whether they know it or not, the team or the coaches, is to be able to foster cultures in which the players feel like they are owed things from the university and they don't have to give everything back, or they don't need to make an equal level commitment the way the school needs to commit to them. So I think Saban understands that and is as qualified as anyone to make comments on the matter. A G5 team's getting into the playoff. Everybody remembers that, right? Is that team going to come from the Mountain West? I am not sure after perusing the schedule. I am sure that you should check out FanDuel, though, because over there you can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. The best. I love college football, folks. I love college football. I'll freely admit, as the host of Locked On College Football, the greatest sporting event on planet Earth is March Madness. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. North Carolina and Houston are at the top of my list of teams that I think are going the distance. But got to see that bracket first. Even if yours gets busted, you can bet all the action at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. So not too long ago, the Mountain West football schedule came out. When I say to you, a group of 5 team is going to make the playoff, who do you think of? Tulane, maybe? Boise State? Remember, SMU is not in the group of 5. You can make the argument that the Mustangs are making a mistake of sorts going to the ACC, which is a very unstable conference. You got a 12-team playoff, and the highest-ranked group of 5 team gets in. SMU had a better path to the playoff in the AAC. But there are all sorts of perks, not really financial ones in the short term anyway, but they've got very deep pockets there in Dallas. That going to the ACC, short term, not the best thing for football. Long term, very well could be. But the 2 leagues that you naturally look at for who gets into the playoff from the group of 5 are the American Conference and the Mountain West. Now, you can't ignore the Sun Belt. You can't ignore Conference USA, who had the highest ranked group of 5 team last year. Liberty got into the Fiesta Bowl. They got beat pretty badly by Oregon, but the team was in. They took one of the 12 playoff spots. And at some point in time, I'm sure a group of 5 team will win a playoff game. I don't think they'll win a national championship, but they could get in there. If the group of 5 got into the 4-team playoff and beat a Notre Dame team that otherwise would have been, this was Cincinnati, of course, in the college football playoff, had they not lost that game, yeah, sure. Maybe. It could happen. It's possible. I don't know if this team is in the Mountain West this year. So the Mountain West schedule came out. And look, it depends on what other teams do. That is for sure. But Oregon State and Washington State have a scheduling alliance with the Mountain West. They're not actually a part of the Mountain West. They cannot play for the conference championship game. So the Beavs and the Cougs can only really play spoiler as it pertains to the Mountain West's playoff hopes. But what do you think your record needs to be? If you're a Mountain West Conference champion, you've played 13 games in the regular season. What do you think you need to be in order to outrank either the Sun Belt, Conference USA, or American Conference champion? Probably at least 10-3, right? That's probably a baseline of where you have to be. 11-2 is likely preferable to ensure you get above that mark. And even that, look at SMU last year, 11-2, a couple of Power 5 losses, a win over Tulane in the American Conference Championship game, and they were outranked by Liberty from Conference USA by lieu of, what the CFP director said. They just kept winning. You can't write that stuff. You cannot script that stuff any better. Florida State left out. Liberty, they just kept winning. It's epic stuff. But this is a beautiful, wonderful sport, the greatest sport in the world. It's not the most well-run or most well-managed. So when you think about the Mountain West and sending a team to the playoff, who are you thinking of there? Well, your typical cast of characters, your Boise States and your Fresno States and Air Force. And what is UNLV going to do? They lose their quarterback, but Barry Odom, their coaching staff, are still in place. So I don't know, maybe the Rebels can surprise some people here or there. Wyoming's got a new coach. They've been pretty good. I don't know if I can expect a conference championship there. Timmy Chang at Hawaii in year 3, do they pop? I don't know. We'll see what they do week 2 at home against UCLA. That's kind of a fascinating game. But Boise State, Fresno State, Yeah, those are the teams that regularly appear in the Mountain West Conference Championship game. In fact, they did a season ago. Neither one of these teams has a schedule that screams to me 10-2 regular season. Why? Here's Boise State's first 2 weeks. At Georgia Southern, a respectable team in the Sun Belt. At Oregon. Yikes. I mean, major yikes. Then they come back home, they get Portland State, and then they play Washington State? Excuse me? Excuse me. Those first 4 games could quite easily be 2-2 for Boise State, and then they'd have to run the table to get to that 10-2 mark. They'd have to win all of these games at UNLV, at Hawaii. They'll probably be okay there. They'll probably be okay. They have to go at Wyoming, by the way. I just want to let that hang out there because I watched Texas Tech lose at Wyoming last year. Could Boise State do it? Yeah. Yeah. Crazier things have happened in college football. Oh, did I mention that Boise State hosts Oregon State in the final week of the regular season? So let's say they get through Georgia Southern. That's good and fine. Between Oregon State, Washington State, both of which are at home, that's important, and at Oregon, they've got to win at least one of those games. And they cannot go 0 for 3 there. I think Boise State with Malachi Nelson, Spencer Danielson coming in after being the interim coach last year, leading to a Mountain West championship game. Yeah, I not just a game, but a championship, rather. They won the game, of course. Yeah, that schedule is not exactly a cakewalk. I can see Boise State going 10-2. Our friends at FanDuel haven't posted lines for anybody in the Mountain West or Oregon State, Washington State. I would very much be curious to see where it'd be. I imagine Boise State's win total there is 8.5. That'd be my guess. That'd be my guess. Now, Air Force was a very good team last year, talked about as a dark horse playoff team after they got off to the undefeated start. I think in the modern era, you can clearly win games and play at a good level running the triple option. There's a ceiling. There's a ceiling. That's the way I feel. Troy Calhoun, outstanding football coach. Really, really good. As long as you're running the triple option, don't know if I can see you running the table sufficiently, but they'll be a contender. They go at Baylor week 3. That's when we'll know. That's when we'll know if Air Force is going to be that sort of team. After their bye, they then have to go on the road again to Wyoming. That's a tough stretch. That's a really, really tough stretch. And then to end the season, they go like this. Fresno State, Oregon State, at Nevada, at San Diego State. Now, the latter two are, of course, rebuilding programs. It's also back-to-back road games. Winning on the road doesn't always come easily. So that could be a tough one. How about Fresno State? How about Fresno State? They start week 1 at Michigan. Good luck. Good luck. Seriously, you're going to need it to go at Michigan. I know they're not the same team. It's still Michigan at the big house. That's a tough way to start a year. Fresno State then goes at home against Sac State, New Mexico State, at New Mexico, at UNLV. Week 5 in the Mountain West. That's a spicy game as it pertains to the conference championship. Then a bye. Get this. At UNLV, bye, host Washington State. Does that sound like an easy game? Not particularly. But wait, there's more. They have to go at Air Force on November 9th, then a bye, and then they host Colorado State, who we know can certainly get a team or two. They got Boise State last year. They very nearly got Colorado in Boulder. And then they go at UCLA, final week of the regular season. That Fresno State schedule is interesting. Very, very interesting. But again, who's going 10-2 in there? Look, somebody certainly can. But is it going to be easy? As Jordan Belfort said, minus one word, absolutely not. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.